Hello, I'm Hannah Jewell. This is Building for Peace with Hannah Jewell, a podcast looking at food sovereignty and healthcare in our changing times. Today, I have Jo Kamal of the Land Workers Alliance, a very special group here in the United Kingdom that's helping small-scale farmers move into their field of choice. So, Jo, I'm so happy to welcome you today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Mm-hmm. So let's start with your background and who are you? How did this passion for land and ecology come about in your life and lead you to this place with the Land Workers Alliance?
Thank you. That's a beautiful question. I guess like on a career like material level, the way that I got into kind of thinking about small scale agriculture and then land justice and how that intersects with politics. I've always been like quite politically active. My parents came to the UK as refugees, Iraqi refugees. My dad's also Kurdish, so there's like a lot of there's the political has always been a part of my family. So yeah, that kind of I've always had that kind of interest in justice, and that led me to studying politics at university, and then kind of going down this like kind of environmental activism route. But that then led to like kind of extreme levels of burnout, because I guess I was like trying to quote unquote decolonize branches of the environmental movement that I was a part of. With, I mean, being the only person really talking about climate justice and racial justice in the context of climate, and yeah, I mean, being sometimes the only person of color in the room talking about these things, and it was incredibly draining. And I basically got to a point where I was too burnt out to be involved in the political anymore, but that was kind of a blessing because it led me to look deeper inwards rather than constantly kind of doing the outward work of like, I need to do all of this stuff. It was more like, okay, this isn't working for me. What does work? What does make me happy? And in that kind of like internal reflection, whilst holding like the very real reality of the climate crisis, I came to this like, oh, I really enjoy connecting with land, and I really enjoy food growing. And within that was also like a desire to kind of look for and be a part of solutions to the climate crisis rather than be constantly talking about all the things that are going to be going wrong, because that can get really draining. And yeah.
A lot of us have been there where we protested because we see that there's a need, and then we realize, oh, wait a minute, actually building the new is going to be much more productive.
Yes, and also so much more fulfilling on a personal level. Like, I think I have activist friends who love doing the activism and the protesting and the direct actions and all of that stuff. I think for me, like, there is something really exciting about, like you say, building something that can rise from the ashes of capitalism and these systems that I truly believe are gonna collapse at some point under the weight of the climate crisis, if not under the weight of something else. So yeah, this desire to kind of be a part of a solution is what brought me to growing and land justice. And then through that, I learned how I could bring the politics to like the wider kind of politics of social justice into food growing and land work. And then wider still, how I could bring the spiritual into that. But then I guess on a more subtle level, I kind of feel like I've always been moving towards land, or moving towards being in closer connection with land, like forever. I have lots of like really fun memories of really deep experiences with trees when I was young. And I was actually recently journaling about how I feel like, although I wasn't kind of framing it in this way, that the trees have been speaking to me and kind of trying to bring me back for a really long time. And now I'm able to be like, oh yeah, they're they're actively talking to me and wanting me to come home.
This is so wonderful to hear you talking about the trees. My own connection with trees has been growing stronger and stronger. And I really feel their sentience, and I feel how they carry the memory of our ancestors. Trees that are hundreds of years old have watched life happen, and that memory is stored within their cells. And they also have the ecological memory of the cycles of our planet. That's been handed down from acorn to oak across centuries and centuries and centuries. So listening to the land, I think, is a hugely important part of the change in how we approach food production and farming. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this. I think that in small scale growing projects, it's quite easy to the work is so important and so necessary, agroecological growing on small scales, and but I feel like that there's that level of the work, and then there's also like a deeper level of connecting, like making it a decolonial act, this food growing process, and I think a part of that is definitely listening to and understanding the sentience of the plants, which I think I'm still at a place of kind of holding this question of like, how do you create a viable business under capitalism where you want to be making money to support yourself financially, in a food system where small scale growing is extremely difficult to make a profit from, and many projects struggle with that, whilst also kind of holding this like feeling that we do need to kind of, within this amazing movement, have more of a consciousness around really listening to and speaking to the land and asking permission from the land, maybe asking permission to harvest, giving gratitude, like so I think that, yeah, I'm kind of like holding these two things in mind, and I know that there are projects around the world that are doing these things, and doing them well. I'm thinking particularly of Soulfire Farm in the US, who kind of really hold the ritual and the spiritual whilst also being an incredibly successful business. So there's a way to do it. I think it's just finding the path. But yeah, I guess like so I'm also a new entrant grower, alongside kind of working at the Landworkers Alliance. And I guess my experience with that has been that like my spiritual connection to plants and like talking to them, meditating with them, being mindful with them is become separated from my growing experience with plants. And there's almost like an element of like still extracting, like we've got to harvest so much of this right now, or we've got to produce so much, and it still feels like there's like an echo of that like capitalist colonial framework of treating the land, which has been quite interesting, yeah, to grapple with.
Yeah, exactly. That framework is so deeply embedded in our collective consciousness that we don't even realize it. And I often look at the way we treat the land and the way we treat women as moving in parallel. And this idea of owning land, of extracting from land, of it being important for its production value, are all things that we've moved through in the women's movement. And now how to find that truth of a deep connection to the production process is the next phase for sure.
Mm.
So what support does the Land Workers Alliance give for small scale farming? And you said it's so incredibly difficult, but so important. Can you just give us a view about how in the UK small scale farming is being handled, how it's growing, a little bit about what the issues and concerns are with the model as it develops?
Yeah, so there's a really exciting kind of budding movement towards small scale agroecological farming in the UK. And it's been kind of steadily, from how I understand it, steadily kind of increasing, which is really exciting. And particularly in the past kind of 2 years, actually, there's been quite an upsurge in young people becoming more interested in this kind of growing. Which I wonder if it is kind of partly to do with the pandemic and how kind of reality's shifted a little bit. So the Land Workers Alliance, I think there's so much that we do that I probably won't even be able to speak to all of it. But so one strand is we're kind of a membership-led union. So the things that we do are kind of directed by our members, and we also do a lot of membership support. So members pay like a kind of a small yearly fee, and for that they can take part in regional, national events, bringing farmers, growers, land workers, foresters, all sorts of land workers together. We have regional member organisers, so we have members who will organise within their regions and localities to bring farmers and land workers together in their kind of regions. And so we do a lot of work trying to support our members in becoming a part of the movement, being active within the movement. And then we also have a big strand around campaigns, policy and advocacy, and movement building. So we have a lot of amazing people working on kind of ELMS, and working on policy and advocacy that support small scale farmers, because at the minute governmentally there isn't really that much support. There actually seems to be more support for the industrial scale farming, which is disheartening. But kind of we're working with lots of other great organisations to remedy that. And then we've also got kind of the movement building strand, which I'm a part of, and we work on strengthening the movement, gathering the numbers, hosting events, kind of prioritising the relationship building, working on systems within the movement. And so there's also, I'm sure, lots of other stuff that I'm not even speaking to right now that we do.
So the awareness part and the strengthening the numbers is so important, because it allows people who are living in cities and not actively involved in food production and farming to begin to understand that this is actually a real issue, and where our food comes from is it's not just an idealistic idea that we should embrace right now. It's actually a fundamental need if we want to survive as a species. And I really appreciate all that you do, the film nights that you host, the events. This really, it allows all of us to come into the movement, which is what we need going forward, is unity. Unity is different than idealism in a lot of ways. Can you share with us what does it mean to connect a farmer to land workers? Like, what is the basics of how small scale farming is moving into action? And who are these young people who are saying, I want to farm small scale, but how do I do it? I'm living in Brighton, I'm 20, I want to do small scale farming. Where do I go?
The young people point is really interesting. So I guess I would count myself as one of those like young people that kind of got swept into this, and from a lot of discussions I've had with various people within the movement, my understanding is that this trajectory from environmental activism into growing is actually quite commonplace. Like, yeah, there's this like climate anxiety, this involvement with the environmentalism, and then there's the, okay, what do I do with the rest of my life now? Like, how do I put this into practice, this knowledge that I have about what's going to happen? How do I enact and like do something with it on a day-to-day? So it feels like there's a really big kind of groundswell there, which is really exciting. And then what was the first part of your question?
What does it mean to connect land workers to farmers? Are they not the same thing? Can you explain this?
Yeah, they are the same thing, land workers and farmers. I guess there's a little bit of a difference between the kind of small scale growers and farmers to the industrial farming. But I think the thing about the Land Workers Alliance is we're not just supporting food growers, we're also supporting people who work with the land in a myriad of ways, including foresters, fishers, like all of the different ways in which businesses are created through land, or connection is created through land, I guess.
So this brings us right back to these keywords of decolonialization and capitalism, and how this is related to our use of land within farming and small-scale farming as an alternative to industrial farming. But also, I love the way you said that businesses are created out of our use of the land. Wow, I don't know where to go from there. It's such a new idea that, the foresters, the fishers, we've all created businesses that are inherently hooked into capitalism. So how do we decolonize from that? We've talked a little bit about the spiritual, which we'll come back to, but on a very practical level, what are some of the steps that people involved in this sort of relationship with the land and they'd like to shift it, what can they do?
It's a really good question, and it's a journey that I'm continually on. I think on a practical level, there's a real need to look at the kind of industry as a whole, and I guess I'll speak to the horticulture industry mostly because that's what I have the most experience of. But on a practical level, there's a need to bring in justice into the movement in a way that attempts have been definitely made to bring that in, but it's still like predominantly, I mean, I think it's one of the least racially diverse industries in the UK, maybe the first or the second, so it's very inaccessible to Black people and people of colour. When Black people and people of colour do get into the horticultural industry, there's a lot of alienation. There's just so many different layers of oppression that can come in. And then we've also got the kind of like class and income and workers' rights element of the horticultural industry, where because it's difficult for small farms to make a profit. There's a lot of reliance on volunteer labour, and so a lot of the time we can find that there's like a power imbalance and a little bit of sometimes some exploitation going on with how people aren't being paid or are being paid very minimally for the work they're doing. And this work is tough. Like it's hard on the body, and it's not low skilled. So on a practical level, I think that there's definitely a need to kind of decolonize the industry as a whole. And maybe that a huge part of that is bringing in a social justice element to it. But then on another level, I think that if we're talking about trying to decolonize, and I don't always know if that's the best word to use, because sometimes I feel like there are very real situations and contexts in which decolonizing literally means giving land back, and I think that is true for the UK as well, that there is a need for reparations with land, but I think sometimes I feel like the word can get kind of thrown around loads, and I think I'm guilty of doing that too. But yeah, I guess like on another level, it is about changing the way that we see the world. Like, it is really changing the structure of our realities. First and foremost, I think that that's where the work starts, which maybe isn't the most practical answer, but I think it's the truest one. Is that we can't like create the change that we're looking for if we haven't first interrogated how our mind has created the reality that we see, how society has created the reality that we see, and how we can shift that into something that is more true.
Yeah, this is really a statement that comes with a lot of wisdom, actually, because we can have programs in place that, for instance, help small scale farms financially, or help a young person move into placement on a farm, which I know that you have these wonderful programs where the young people can contact you and then find their way into that work, or where you're bringing landscape designers with an ecological focus in connection with a farm that wants to move to a more sustainable, so those practical things aren't actually going to take root unless they've taken root in our psyches and our hearts. And this is where we come back again to the place of, this is not idealism, and it's a little bit crisis management, but it's actually our movement towards unity. And if we don't move towards unity, which means a leveling of class and an integration of racial differences, then how are we going to change our fundamental ways of relating with the land if we can't do it with each other? Yeah,
absolutely.
So what is it like when you're in a room full of people doing some of the organizational work, or you're on the farm growing, and you find that you're the only person of color and you carry a different set of experiences within you that are needing expression and aren't visible? Can you share with us what that feels like?
Yeah, I think it's a complex one because when you're working in this industry, you're often friends with the people that you're working with. The people that you work with are usually kind of really great and well-intentioned, and still, like you say, I can be the only person of color in the space, or one of very few, and I think the overarching kind of feeling that can come in is that these spaces aren't for me, that I conversely that I have to assimilate into something that I'm not in order to be in these spaces, which is something that I definitely learning to work through, this kind of like imposter syndrome that comes as a result of my racialized identity, and I guess also like as a result of like my other identities, like being queer and gender non-conforming, like I guess it's like in many places there's that feeling that, should I be here, and I think the antidote to that is finding others who are there and doing the same thing as you. And I'm so lucky that I have been able to find those communities within the industry and the movement that do reflect my identities, and seeing very, very like real examples of people like me doing the work that I'm doing. And that's made me feel so much more emboldened in being able to be outspoken about the work that I do, and feeling like I have an important part to play in the space. But yeah, it's still a learning process, that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How we relate to the land we're living on and how we relate to the ancestry that's within our blood and our bones is a question that we get to really move through in the next decades, and especially in your generation. I feel it in mine, you know. I grew up in America, but my ancestry is from the UK, and I eventually ended up back here without the intention to kind of excavate my own DNA and blood relationship to this land. But of course, that happens.
Mm.
So, you have a relationship with an ancestry in a land that is not this one. And that is in conversation with this land that you walk every day. I don't see these as opposed binaries, but as meeting plates for exchange, which allows us to grow. That's the whole permaculture idea of it. Okay, the history in me meets the current reality of the space, and where do those form a new culture, a new culture. So I'm just feeling hope for the future with the young people really understanding that this is part of the work of how our responses to climate change are different than what the capitalist mindset would project onto us. So, and this is like the grassroots understanding that this sort of flowers up. That's the way I'm seeing it as I speak with you.
Mm-hmm.
Grassroots movements, they've been important for a long time. Would you say the Land Workers Alliance is part of that sort of grassroots movement? And how might government policy, those with land and wealth who want to make this bridge, how might they interact with the grassroots movement in an ideal way that really does bring harmony?
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say thank you for everything that you just said there. I got so many goosebumps. And I loved the phrase in conversation. Yeah, I thought that was really beautiful. Yeah, I guess we're talking within the LWA and about like how can we kind of marry these like industrial farmers who want to move into agroecological farming, or landowners who have lots of land and don't know what to do with it and want people to take it over, I don't know who to ask, kind of thing. And so there's definitely kind of conversations being had about how we can bridge that gap between people who are looking for land and people who are wanting to have their land managed in a sustainable way. And so I think that for me, there's something in that feels really like energizing and exciting, with the caveat that if there are also lots of problems with renting land and the power that comes in with that, so it's not perfect, but there is support for farmers who want to transition, and who want to make that transition into agroecology, and that we're starting to have talks and conversations around how we can land match with new entrants. So that feels like quite a hopeful, like tangible way in which we can start, connecting these seemingly disparate kind of parts of the picture together.
And how lucky that we have an organization committed to that kind of process that can support us. So beautiful. Let's talk a little bit about reciprocity, because we talked about this as we were preparing for the cast. And reciprocity is a little bit more than just how I feel when I'm walking on the land. And it is related to decolonization and a sense of sovereignty. what's springing from within you on this topic?
Yeah, I guess for me, reciprocity is the antithesis of extractivism and extracting, which is the kind of quintessential colonial model of relating to land, right? It's like, and also people, and how and it's how patriarchy deals with women and non-binary people and trans people. It's yeah, it's the extracting and the kind of objectification, and therefore the devaluing of all of these things that that's kind of how I view it. And then I think reciprocity is the opposite for me. It's like the other side of the where you are recognizing the inherent value of something, irrespective of whether it can give you something that you're looking for or whether you can take from it. It being valuable in and of itself, and then being able to be in relationship with the plant or the land or the people, in a way that is reciprocal, and really kind of honors the idea of like giving and receiving in equal measure, without expectation. I'd also be curious to hear what your thoughts are on that, actually.
Yeah. So when we were talking before, the notes I made were that reciprocity is how we care for each other. And this thing you brought is equals, and that it involves kindness and respect. And it's inherently heart-based and inclusive. And so if we want to move from the colonial mindset of extraction to a place of equality with land and with each other, then we have to get to know our hearts and be willing to be inclusive. And that is not as easily done as it is said. My own experience with that, really embodying inclusivity and being heart-centered, is a daily process of value for the other, whether that's a tree or a person or a dog. Real value for the beings that are in front of you. And then forgiveness. No being is perfect. And then that leads into forgiveness for yourself and non-judgment and a willingness to meet. And so these are the kinds of qualities that come into reciprocity for me that I don't always hear in the conversations, but that I really feel.
Yeah, I love that you said kindness there, as well, because I think maybe for some people, and I mean for the way that we've kind of been conditioned, the idea of being kind to a blade of grass or a plant that you're walking past might seem ludicrous. But I love that, like, because it's what we should be kind of anchoring ourselves to, this kindness to everything that exists. Yeah, I love that word.
Yeah, some examples that I think of are like, it's commonplace, I've heard from my friends that I've met who've lived in India, to take a bit of your rice and put it out to feed the ants and the small bugs, and we call them mini beasts in this country. That's an practical act of kindness that's inherently in reciprocity. And in many indigenous cultures, I was reading about the Sherpa people recently, just the offering of incense and the sound of the bowls and water in the morning to the spirits of the land. It is a practical act which imbues reciprocity within us.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. You're making me think actually of this idea that it's so easy to talk about it, and so much harder to do. And I'm thinking of this. I did a little tarot reading for myself a few weeks ago, and I got this thing come up about kind of honoring the land as elder, and this like kind of like this sticky feeling came up for me, in that where I realized that I had this problem with like maybe this is a tangent but had this problem with kind of deference to authority, and I realized that I had to kind of separate the giving of respect and honor to the land as something different to the experience, that the life experience I've had with authority and the kind of abuses of power. And you're just making me think about how like it's a process of learning and unlearning how we can be in better relationship, and that is about kind of unearthing the parts of us and the experiences within us that can stop us from doing that in the best of ways. And I think my fear of kind of really bowing down to something greater than myself was coming from this kind of experience that I needed to deal with in order to be in better relationship. That just came up for me while you were speaking.
I'm so happy that came forward, because that really brings the conversation in to the connection between spirituality, decolonization, reciprocity, these really key areas that actually have to come together for our survival. So surrender is an important part of the process. And I love the way you said, how can I surrender when I've had this oppressive relationship with authority? And that really helps me understand that inner work, to bring the reverence back, and what we're surrendering to as something greater is not like a big white God in the sky that's wrathful.
Mm-hmm.
But the intelligence of love.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you asked about the Sufi figurine in the background here, and my relationship to Sufism before we started. And if it had to be boiled down to one sentence and distilled, it would be the intelligence of love moving through us. It's what we're looking to connect.
Put goosebumps. Yes, absolutely.
You've talked a little bit about matching landowners with land workers, and how that is really exciting and also has some issues. Can you talk a little bit about access to nature, land with no names, how this is also a racialized process, and how do we get back to this place where land cannot be owned? It's a quantum leap for humanity.
Yeah, huge question. So yes, there is. So land in our names is a great collective working to kind of bridge the gap between racial justice, climate justice, land access, and land justice, and trying to I guess change the narrative around land, and also to help BIPOC in really tangible ways. Like they provided this BIPOC growers grants a couple of years ago to support new entrants, or people who are needing courses or tools, or whatever they were needing to help them into the horticultural industry. And they also work at kind of the intersection that I feel really passionately about with race and land and climate. So they're amazing, and I think that what they are speaking to is the racial inequality and the historic oppression and violence and domination that has really been rooted in land through colonialism, through slavery, through and that still kind of exists today. It's not that it is just historical, it's a living thing. And so many BIPOC in the UK live in inner cities. Access to land is difficult. Proportionately speaking, BIPOC are more likely to be lower income. So maybe would have more difficulties accessing nature outside of the city. When we do access nature outside of the city, there is discrimination, racialization, and that's even more so for when anti-blackness comes in, colorism comes in. So this, I guess this idea of like connecting to nature is so deeply important, but it's also important for us to understand what is stopping people from connecting to nature, and how are the systems under which we live actively like preventing different marginalized, racialized groups into being able to reach that place of an empowering relationship with land and nature, and how is that working in an intentional way to stop that empowerment? Because I really think that the being able to cultivate a relationship with land is a part of self-actualization and self-realization and resistance. So if that's being stopped, then I'm curious about why. But this is a huge rant, but basically accessing nature and accessing land for BIPOC is not a simple story. And we're talking about like displacement and colonialism and so many different layers of the politics that come in to this when we discuss race and land together.
Mm-hmm. And it occurs to me that even a lot of the voices that are published in the popular magazines, newspapers, and conversations that are considered to have authority are still colonial voices. They're still white, male privileged voices. And these people as individuals may be beautiful, but it's so important that we bring young, female, trans, queer, colored voices through, because they have been oppressed and they have so much wisdom, these voices, because of their experience. So this is Land with No Names.
Land in our names.
Land in our names.
Yes.
So be sure to put in the links, like the young people's moving into farming program and the Land in Our Names program and connections to you. I'm just wondering if you might really bring your voice through and share with us like one of the most important experiences you've had, whether that was harvesting a sunflower or or something much more grand that has really moved within your being.
That's a really, really great question. I'm thinking what's coming up for me isn't like a particular moment in time, but it's this journey that I'm on, that is it feels quite vulnerable to say, but it feels like this journey that I'm taking with reconnecting to land, and kind of like this hole, or this part of me that has been disconnected for so long, going on a journey to reconnecting, and how much healing, like the trauma healing that comes in when you are able to cultivate this relationship. That feels like, the most life-changing thing that I think I'll ever experience. This long, iterative, non-linear journey with reconnecting to land, which is really reconnecting to myself and with others, because there is no separation between me or land and nature. Yeah, that feels like the biggest thing.
That's so wonderfully put and so tender. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. We have a lot of collective trauma to heal, so much it's sometimes like overwhelming, and that simple act of allowing ourselves connection and making sure those without access have it. What a powerful way to be in the world. Yeah. I am so pleased to have this conversation. The sense of hope within me is really buoyed by speaking with you. Thank you, Jo.
Thank you. Thank you so much for hearing me speak and having me on your podcast.
It's been an honor, and I really look forward to all the wonderful things that will happen in your life and in this lifetime in our world as we all focus on these issues.
Thanks, Hannah.
Have a wonderful day, Jo.
You too.